I came up with this idea for a video where I was going to record. So I have two iPhones right now, and that's a problem for me because I have to figure out what to do with the other iPhone, the new iPhone that most people would rather have generally. But as I've said, I have a few problems with that iPhone. I'm not going to get into that, but I don't have faith that the next iPhone will be better. And what I really mean is the operating system. It's not so much the phone itself, because the phone really, in a way, is superior than versus what I use now, which is an iPhone 13. But anyway, so right now I have two phones. I don't really want to have two phones, but so I'm paying. Anyway, so I have the two phones. I came up with this idea to record myself scrolling TikTok and then sort of do some kind of a commentary on it. And that's very popular right now. Not what I just said, but the so-called commentary. And then people get mad because you're watching something and it's like the other person's content, but you're commenting on it. I don't really understand that. Because if you're commenting, that's part of the entertainment. So like someone like Asmongold, that's kind of like largely what he does, is watch some kind of a video and then he's commenting on it. I understand on some level that, well, he's taking someone else's work and then using it partly to make money or however much money he makes. I guess he's a millionaire, I don't know. But so I don't have the problem with that other people seem to have. But so anyway, I came up with this idea and then I was like, well, how am I going to hold the phone? Like, my hands aren't even that shaky, but if you're trying to hold a phone, so in other words, I was going to have the phone on a table and then have the other phone recording it, like video or whatever. And then I thought, well, how am I going to hold the phone? And then I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to do it because my hands are going to be too shaky. It's going to mess with the video. And then I kind of had this idea of setting up a rig where I would attach the phone to my the microphone holder stand, right? And I was like, I don't know that that's going to work. But then I did it. I got some yarn, whatever, a little rope, it's yarn, I think. I don't know what it is. It's what I used to hold up the painting that I got and put it up against the wall. It's strong. Except I doubled it, But so I did that. I tied it to the microphone stand, and then I had this sort of rig where I could do it. And then I was doing it, and I was like, this doesn't work somehow, and I'm self-conscious because I can't have the music on, which is basically just a crutch. I don't think it's not as if this this Wii menu music is going to stop someone from hearing that I'm talking to myself. In fact, it might make it seem a little bit even weirder, but it's just something that I feel like I have to do when I record these videos. But the point is, so I started doing that. I did what it wasn't really that difficult. I just tied the in a specific way, I tied the phone to the microphone stand, and I had it so that I had a perfect angle, and I didn't have to hold it. And I could just scroll through TikTok while I was recording the other phone, But I just thought, this is kind of boring. And the other thing is, it has nothing to do with the content that I normally do, but anyone who watches these videos knows that I don't really operate that way, and that I do different types of videos. And I think it's part of the reason that my videos don't go into the algorithm is, because generally you're supposed to have a brand or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that that's not the way I do my videos. And if I ever had this feeling like I didn't mind people knowing who I was, I would start recording myself, especially because of what I explained, where YouTube is limiting people's videos in the algorithm who are just a voice, but you don't see them, because the AI is confusing those videos with the AI videos that are propagating throughout YouTube, and that they're supposedly fighting against these AI videos where it's an AI voice, And in the process of doing that, they're limiting people who actually aren't AI. Again, I'm skeptical of that, but that's the explanation that I've heard. And so, what was I saying? Yeah, so I wouldn't even mind doing that at some point, like if I didn't mind people knowing who I was, which I do. So, because I've kind of said like, oh, I'm a little self-conscious about the way I look, but that's really not the reason. It's basically just amounts to like, I don't want people seeing my face. So it's probably never gonna happen. Well, no, if I live long enough and at some point I'm like retired or something, which just seems so, it seems like a weird notion to me. Like it's theoretical, you know? But anyway, if I lived long enough, I probably would be one of those types of people to do a video and just record myself. And it would get much more popular, I would imagine, because I would be comfortable with talking about what I wanted to talk about, because I would be retired by that point, and I wouldn't be afraid of, like, someone from work telling someone something, whatever, and, you know, that type of thing, which is the problem that I have. As I've said, like, if I could do it, I can't do this, but if I could tell YouTube, like, oh, you know, and YouTube said to me, like, where would you like these videos to be propagated? You know, obviously that's not how it works, but if it said that, I would say, every part of the United States, I have no problem with it, except around where I live. But even then, that's not ideal in the sense that, like, people are going to talk to each other, you know, and then someone else ends up finding out. But really, I would be fine with that. That would be sort of my ideal situation. By the way, if you like the Wii menu music, and I only know this song because I used to watch someone who had this in the background, this music in the background of one of her videos, and I liked it so much that somehow I figured out what the music was. I've played Wii a couple of times. In 2012 or something, somehow my mom gave me a Wii, you know. I don't remember why I decided that I wanted a Wii, and especially that late, you know, because, like, that was just about 6 years after it had come out. But I decided that I wanted that, and then I played it for a little bit, and somehow I thought, this is boring, and so I just returned it. And, you know, I at that time, and, you know, not just at that time, but generally, like, I didn't have $200 or whatever it was. I think it might have been $250, but, like, I didn't feel like I had $250 to just spend on something that I wasn't going to use. And it was her money, because I didn't start making money until I was 37. That's another way in which I'm a little bit of a strange person, you know. And I'm not saying that I'm better. I'm just saying, like, you think of these people that, like, and by the way, my first job was when I was 19, so it wasn't a thing where, like, I refused to work or something like that. But I had a few jobs, and then in 2001 I quit the job that I had, which I had to drive pretty far away to get to. But that wasn't really why I quit it. But then it was like a thing where my mom and I were arguing about, like, you have to go back to school again, and, you know, and then I did that and nothing worked out, and so yeah. But the point is, like, so, and then I had OCD, and that's the other big part of it, and not in some sort of whimsical sense, you know. It was like, it really kind of robbed me of, to some extent, it robbed me of my 20s, you know. And then I was sort of able to get back on my feet again. And, but the point is, I had 15 years where I did not have a job. And at certain points, I was going to school and trying to do that only for my mom, because she got upset and I didn't feel like arguing with her. And to be fair, I didn't know what the fuck else to do, except get a job. And at some point, I made that decision, like, I'm going to get a job because I don't have any money. And then she died shortly after that. And in some cosmic sense, I feel like that was somehow cosmically timed, even though she didn't facilitate me getting that job in any way. I don't have connections, and this is part of the problem with the job market today, because people have this notion of like, we'll just apply for a job, and it's like, for a lot of people, it's a lot more difficult than that, especially if you don't know people. And so I don't know people out here, so I just had to apply for a basic retail job, and then I ended up doing that job for a long time. So anyway, what I was going to say was like, so if you like this Wii menu music, which to me it's kind of soothing, but it's also a little bit irritating at the same time, but I have to have something on in the background, and for this one I chose the Wii menu music. But I was thinking as I was listening to it, this reminds me of something. And then I remembered, it reminds me of the song by Earth, the Dylan Carlson band. The song Crooked Axis for String Quartet, which is in the movie Kurt and Courtney. It's just a little bit of a creepy song, but it's at the same time it's kind of relaxing. It's a weird. Earth is a weird band, and that's why I like them. But for the most part, that band is basically kind of stoner metal, drone metal, however you want to call it. But that song is kind of a departure, but a lot of it is like instrumental, and that song is basically kind of the same thing being played on a keyboard, and it's kind of similar to this. So anyway, I was going to do that video, and where I was recording myself scrolling through TikTok just to be funny, not like it was going to be like it, but in other words, it was going to be whimsical. It had nothing to do with me trying to make social commentary, but I was going to be scrolling and then commenting on what I saw. And I would ask people if they'd want to see that, but generally I've found that with this channel, whenever I ask something, I don't really seem to get a response. And it's one of those questions that it doesn't really matter whether the people that I would be asking care, because it's either I have the energy to do it and it's going to make sense, or it won't scan, it won't come across the way I wanted it to. So, and that's what was happening. So, in other words, what I'm saying is it's not that I don't give a shit what people think. But first of all, if you're on YouTube, you can watch whatever you want. You don't have to watch what I put out. Like that video that I did where I was talking about Castle Frankenstein, the video game. I really liked that video. I liked how it came out, but it got very few views. It didn't go into the algorithm. And again, that might be because of what I was talking about with the changes that YouTube is making, where it doesn't want to promote people who are speaking, and but you can't see their face or whatever. But again, like I said, I'm kind of skeptical of that. But so, just as an addendum, a little bit to the video that I did last night with talking about why women like drag shows. I feel the same way. I haven't changed my mind, but this is why sometimes I should just write whatever the fuck I'm talking about, write it and then read it, but I've chosen not to. These videos are off the top of my head, obviously, and I do that somewhat intentionally because it's a different style. I don't think it's bad to have a script and then read it. I don't think that at all. But I do think it's a different type of video, But in that case, for something like that, where I'm sort of doing a social commentary thing and trying to explain something that I think a lot of people don't quite understand, it would have been better for me to just write it down, and then, type it out and then read it. But anyway, I wanted to say that, this is what I was not sort of quite getting across, or maybe it did come across because I was so fucking wordy about it. But anyway, a lot of women, especially today, I don't think they used to feel this way. I think it's a function of modernity. I do, but they feel inferior to men, and it's ironic because men are being told that they have white male privilege, whatever. But meanwhile, an awful lot of them kind of feel worthless, So it's a weird thing for a whole bunch of women to be walking around feeling inferior to men and feeling resentful of them. And then, so as a result, it's very funny if you see Dustin Hoffman dressed up in drag with makeup on, because it's sort of, he's debasing himself and he's lowering himself in that way. So that, like I said, I think that's what's going on, but I think the reason that women feel inferior is because we've set up this constructed sort of war between the sexes, which it doesn't really help anyone except the globalists and the people in power, because they are against a nuclear family for a reason. And if you're a conservative type of woman, generally you don't really have this hang-up where you're walking around feeling that men they're lucky and they got lucky, you know, and that you're angry because they're privileged, you know. Because, and I don't even need to say this, but women have their own ways in which they are superior, or however you want to say it. They have their own things that men don't really have, you know. And it's a weird thing to pit men and women against each other. It's I just don't see how this is a good thing. But anyway, so yeah, that was my thought on that whole thing. But I was going to talk a little bit about anxiety, but more specifically fear, and what I think some people, and I'm including myself, I'm going to be talking about something that happened to me, have a perverse relationship with fear. Now, fear is an unpleasant emotion. Universally, I don't think anyone, even if they were sort of playing devil's advocate or something, I don't think they would say that they like to be afraid or anything like that. They might say they have a feeling of anxiousness before they do public speaking or something, but maybe that helps them. But no one likes the feeling of fear, you know. So, but I think we have a perverse relationship with fear. Some people, it depends on the type of person, but I think if you're talking about like a sociopath, not that that's good, but I don't think that they suffer from this problem that I'm going to be talking about. So, when I was growing up, I had a relatively happy childhood, even though my family was somewhat dysfunctional, but it was still an intact family. My mom and dad were both home, and my dad really didn't talk to me very much, and he was in World War II, and I was so not interested in that when I was a kid that I never asked him about it. And then I ended up, when I read one of his books, I was like, oh wow, I did not know that he was a sergeant in the army. There wouldn't be no reason for him to lie about that, you know what I mean? And I knew that he was in World War II. And it's kind of funny to me that he would even be a sergeant, because he was not that type of person. So in other words, he was not the type of person who liked to order people around. He was kind of an alpha male on some level, like, so in that sense maybe, but like, he was not a person who got his kicks from making other people feel small. And I've seen these types of people. That's the joy they get in their day, is making someone else feel small. He was not like that. Not that that means that all sergeants or would be like that, but you know what I mean. So I only knew it from that. But yeah, so, but like I said, I found out more about him reading a book that he wrote than a lot of times than I don't know how to phrase this, but let's just put it this way. I found an awful lot about him from a book that you would have thought that I would have, even in my short time with him, he died when I was 17, that you would have thought I would have at some point, talked to him about this, but I never really got the chance to. But before he died, I had a relatively happy upbringing, and I looked forward to the next day, which is a somewhat alien idea for me now. I look forward to going to sleep, or I look forward to drinking. I look forward to escaping in some way, And I look forward somewhat to reading, and I've explained this to people because it sounds a little bit pretentious, but I just want people to know, even if it's hard for you to read, because everyone has their different levels of, being literate, but even if it's kind of a challenge, it's actually kind of fun to read a book versus watching a movie, because the fact that it takes effort to read, and you have to be actively when I'm really tired, I can't read, and I'm feeling like fatigued and stuff, or depressed, I can't really read, because I'm not going to be able to pay attention and be attentive of what I'm not going to be able to attend to what I'm doing, which is reading. It's an active activity on some level that watching a movie isn't really. I mean, it can be, but I'm just saying, like, if you're reading a book and you want to escape, in that sense, reading is actually a better escape than watching a movie, because of the fact that you have to be engaged while you're reading, That's the main thing I want people to know about reading. But anyway, so like I was saying, I grew up and I was pretty happy, and I would look forward to the next day, and I would see my brother or my sister, and I wasn't like painfully lonely and stuff like that. But then things started to go downhill after my dad died, and even a little bit before he died, my OCD, I started to have symptoms of OCD that I did not understand. And the funny thing is that my brother had it, and it was well known that he was taking Prozac for his OCD. And by the way, just as an aside, because I've been told so many times that I need to be on an antidepressant by various people, including something like an SSRI, like Prozac. But the funny thing is, when I had OCD in my 20s and I would take Prozac, it actually helped. Even though it's not, I don't think it's whatever the word is, prescribed specifically for OCD, but it is prescribed for that reason. I indicated. I don't think it's indicated for OCD. Is that the word? Anyway, but the funny thing is that it really worked for me. And when I was taking, the times that I've taken an SSRI for depression, it didn't really seem to do anything personally. So I don't know, like, to me that's not really a good solution. But if there were a pill that I weren't anxious about taking, yeah, I would take it. I wouldn't be like opposed to it. This is something that my therapist really never understood. And all she understood was that I wasn't taking an SSRI, and she wanted me to be. That was sort of the beginning and end of her understanding of my relationship with antidepressants. But so yeah, I started exhibiting symptoms of OCD even before my dad died. But so then my brother, this music is starting to, I'm just going to leave it because I've already started it. I don't want to like change into another music while I'm doing the same video. But anyway, so, my brother, so he got cancer when he was 23. And the reason that happened, to the extent that we understand it, because, it's not completely clear, but basically he had, so he died the next year after my dad died. And so he had celiac disease, which this is another one of those things that's not quite properly understood, because this whole thing with like gluten intolerance and gluten sensitivity, I think some people don't understand that it's not a joke. It's a very you can think of it as a joke if someone's doing this thing where like they have to eat a certain way, but really it's partially in their head, and what are they even doing, like that type of thing, and they call attention to themselves like, oh, I don't eat gluten and that type of stuff. But in the case of someone with celiac disease, it literally fucks with your digestion, it fucks with your body. You can't process gluten in the same way that other people can. I've gotten tested for this because of my brother, and basically it came back negative, but then they said, well, really, if you want to get actually tested, you have to have the, what's it called? Endoscope, whatever. They put a scope or something down your digestive tract and into your stomach, and somehow maybe they take a sample of something. I don't remember exactly, but somehow that's like the real deal, test to find out if you have celiac disease. But I feel like at this point in my life, I would know if I did. And I've tried to stop eating gluten to make myself feel better. Oh, by the way, in my last video, I said 2003 when I meant 2023 when I was talking about drinking. I that was just one of those, just slip of the tongue types of things, and then I corrected it in the description, but I was like, I don't think anyone's even going to read that. But anyway, yeah, it doesn't really matter. But so the point is, like, it was pretty well understood that he got cancer because that he just ignored that aspect of himself, and he ate whatever the hell he wanted. And you might think, well, didn't your mom or your dad, like, why didn't they stop him? And, well, first of all, my mom did try, and my sister was explaining this to me one time, that this was, like, when I was little, I think. And so she has a little bit of a better memory than I do. But the point is, like, this would have been when I was probably, like, 3, 4, 5. I wouldn't have even known it was going on. But basically, my mom went to, in the city, some sort of a nature food type of store to get a non-gluten pancake mix. And again, this was back in the 80s, so you're talking about, like, this would have been not easy, even in the city. This was just not as prevalent back then, finding gluten-free, alternatives for whatever you want to eat. So she said that she went along with them, and something about she said that he would pitch a fit if he had to eat non-gluten stuff, or that he got very upset about it. Maybe he cried or whatever. But yeah, so it was too much of a struggle for my mom to keep that up, and if she had known what would happen later on, of course, she would have said, I don't care if you cry, I don't care if you throw a fit, you can't eat gluten, it can't be part of your diet, That's basically the approach that she and my dad would have both had. But I think now we understand that if you have celiac disease, it's not a joke, and you have to not eat gluten, basically, because it can have effects down the road. It's not just a matter of, like, it messes with your digestion and then you can't shit properly or whatever it is that happens, and it messes with your ability to absorb nutrients, I think. But anyway, he just ate whatever he wanted, and he ate weird stuff. So he ended up having cancer, and then so he died. And the way that I approached that was, it was confusing to me from the perspective of sort of like the spirituality that I had and some of my beliefs and stuff, because I thought, well, my brother was a very sort of optimistic type of person, and he liked life. So in other words, I'm saying, like, I'm sort of like a curmudgeon type of person. Even back then, I was sort of cynical and stuff like that. And, but he was not like that. And he had, ebullience or enthusiasm about life that I did not have. And so I felt like, well, and the other thing is that I was overweight for most of my childhood. People now say that I'm slim, but I'm one of these people like Jerry O'Connell or whatever, where I was a fat kid, and then later I lost weight. And it's caused unfortunate, certain things with my body to stretch, a little bit of loose skin and stuff like that, But that's what it was, and some people can avoid that, but it seemed like I didn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to avoid that with. But apparently I still look young or whatever. But anyway, yeah, I was a fat kid and I was not athletic and I didn't like sports. Didn't like him then, don't like him now. I don't think I ever will. But yeah, so he was kind of trim and fit, Like I remember this example of like we would go to the school near where we lived, and they had like a jungle gym type of an outdoor thing where we called it an obstacle course, and that is sort of what it was. But there was part of it was where you had a rope, and it was like this sort of like the Arc de Triomphe. It's sort of like a rectangle shape, but you go through it. You know what I mean? So like it was sort of like a rectangle of wood that was open. So I'm saying like it was. In a sense, it was shaped like a door, but it was about 20 feet or whatever it was, and it was like a rectangle of wood, and it had 2 ropes coming down and bolted to the ground, or I think it was bolted to the grass actually. But anyway, and the point is like you would have, so the rope was not dangling; it was straight down, and you didn't have to climb it like a military person, like you didn't just straight up climb it. You could, I guess, but like you would climb it with your feet up against. So you would be climbing the rope, and you'd have your feet up against the wood part, so you could sort of walk up it at the same time. And he was perfectly able to do that, and he was able to do other things physically as well. He was kind of strange, and he would do a thing where he would jump in the pool. Out here we had a pool, and he would jump in the pool, and he would go down to the bottom of the deep end and just sit there, and he was able to just hold his breath. And I didn't understand. I got frustrated with him, but he did it because he was sort of teasing me. But I just thought, I don't understand how you can go down. You're holding your breath. The air in your lungs is going to keep you from going down. How do you do that? But I didn't understand but he was able to do it. And I guess, he must have like not really taken a deep breath, and like instead he sort of exhaled before doing that. But he was able to hold his breath for an impressive amount of time to do that. And he would do this thing where he would swim down to the bottom of the deep end, almost like he had died or something, and then he would come back up, and I was always like, I don't know how you do that, it's the type of thing an older brother does, So if it sounds like I have zero masculine influence, like growing up, that's not really quite true. I didn't have much of a father. He was there, but we didn't really talk, and he didn't really give me much advice. But I did have an older brother who did certain things like that, and he would dare me to do things, and he dared me to jump off this high thing. And when I landed, I knocked my teeth. I could have really bitten my tongue, but fortunately my tongue was not out. And the funny thing is I didn't break any teeth, but it was painful. So I knocked my jaw into my knee. That's the type of thing you do when you're a little kid and you don't know what the fuck you're doing, But so he would dare me to do things like that, and he dared me to jump over a fence. And like I said, I was not athletic. So what happened was that I jumped over the fence, and I snagged my wrist on this. There was, how do you say this? But like the fence, it's like a fence with the a chain link fence. And part of one of the wires of the chain link fence was like exposed. It was coming out, and I basically slipped my wrist jumping over the fence, and it cut. I still have the scar, and it cut really deeply, almost where like if you saw my wrist, you would think, oh, I guess you tried to commit suicide, but you didn't know how to do it because it's vertical, because that's how it cut me. And I remember that he was really like freaked out by that, because it cut so deep. And he was like, okay, we have to get you home. We have to, he was legitimately concerned, but mainly he was afraid that Mom would get angry. but I don't think she even did. The funny thing is, as deep a cut as it was mainly like, I think lateral would be the word, but like it didn't cut so much deeply. It cut like kind of from side to side. So it was like kind of a sliver of my skin. But it was, at the same time, it was deep, but in a lateral way, not like going in. So that's partly why it wasn't really that bad of an injury. It looked bad, But so there was that type of thing, and he had no trouble jumping over the fence. But so I had this feeling that he was sort of like an athletic type of person, and he basically was, even though he didn't eat very well and he didn't really play sports, but at the same time he had his own type of athleticism that I didn't really have. And I always thought of him as being kind of more healthy than I was, especially because I was overweight. So when he got sick and he died, the way that I processed that was, I thought, okay, so this is a message from God telling me that you have no control over your life. No one has control over their life. And, that you would think, well, you can sort of take from that, like, that's a positive thing, because, like, well, then just don't worry about it. You don't have control, but that's not how I responded. I basically thought, like, so God decided to, and at that time I believed in God in a different way from the sort of nebulous way that I do now, that I don't really know how to define, But I definitely don't think of God in that way, but I kind of felt like God had sort of betrayed me, or betrayed, I don't like it when the music suddenly stops like that. But I felt basically that this was a message from God, sort of going like, you can't control anything. I just want you to know that. And I can kill anyone who appears to be perfectly healthy. And this was all internal, But this is sort of how I was processing it. And then I thought, well, if I'm afraid already, then if God chooses to kill me in whatever horrible way, disease, whatever it is, and, back then I would have been thinking about it that way, like God kind of did it, then if I'm afraid already, it kind of cancels it out, because I'm already afraid. So God's not going to do or if he does, and I get some sort of disease, and by the way, I do have some sort of a disease that has not been diagnosed, and I don't think it ever will be. It's not really a disease, but it's sort of like a condition, a neurological thing, that progresses very slowly, fortunately for me, but it causes certain side effects that I've just had to learn to live with and deal with. But and I'm not saying, oh, poor me. I'm just saying, like, I do kind of have something, but everyone has different problems, and a surprising number of people have problems that go undiagnosed. Kurt Cobain had this stomach thing that apparently, because he went to the doctor many times in his life to address the problem, because it was so physically painful for him. And they basically, it's a weird thing where it still seems like it's somehow a mystery. Like, we don't really know what was wrong with his stomach, but then they said they put an endoscope down into his stomach, and they discovered that there was some sort of it was kind of like an ulcer, but apparently they didn't call it that. But anyway, so, and he said his mom also had the same thing, and it was very painful for her. So in his own personal way, he discovered kind of like what the problem was. But the point is, like, a surprising number of people have some kind of medical thing that actually just continues to go undiagnosed. And that's one of the solaces that I have about this thing, because I feel like I don't have enough money to just go to doctor and after doctor after doctor. I had a battery of tests. I've had, throughout the years, I've had 4 MRIs of my brain. And every time that I've done it, they've said, unexceptional. And that basically that's like in a way the best outcome you can have. So that's great and everything, but at the same time, it leaves me with nothing. And like I said, the last time that I had this battery of tests, I said to the neurologist, I said to him, like, look, I've done all these tests. Please don't tell me, like, there's nothing I can do. And that's one of the things that really bothers me when a doctor says that. Because I feel that in life, there's never nothing you can do. Whatever condition you have, however hopeless or bleak it seems, there's always something that you can do to somehow address it and try to correct it to whatever extent that you can, So I'm talking to him, and he's like, there's nothing, I know that you have some sort of a problem, but there's nothing that's coming up. There's nothing that's showing up, and I said, but I've taken all these tests. Can you at least tell me something to take, like a supplement? Like, because I have supplements that I take. I don't know if they're working at all. And then all he said to me was, well, yeah, you could take vitamin E, which was a new one to me because I had heard of other stuff before, but vitamin E as a way to sort of regulate your nervous system, I had never heard of that. And ever since then, so it's been 7 years since I did that battery of tests. So ever since then, I've been taking vitamin E, not every day, not religiously, but I always have a bottle of vitamin E, and it always runs out because I continue to take it, and it seems to slow the progress of whatever this is. So it's just a weird thing, but I'm glad that I pushed back a little bit because it seems like the vitamin E is helping, and I don't even know how he came up with that answer because I'm not a biologist, as people, as the LGBT people would say about someone's gender or their sex. Well, I'm not a biologist. I don't know. I don't know if he's a woman or a man. I'm not a biologist, but yeah. So I don't know the connection between vitamin E, and I'm sure I've looked it up, but I do, as Christian Bale asked in The Empire of the Sun. He said to some lady, I think, he said, "Do you believe in vitamins?" So I do believe in vitamins. I think that some supplements and vitamins do help you, and it's sort of annoying to me when people say, well, you can take it if you want. It's just going to result in expensive urine. It's like, okay, that's the type of person who's like a know-it-all type of thing, But so yeah, he died, and my basic visceral response was not really sadness. I didn't cry that much. And part of it was because back then I believed that he had gone to heaven. And in 2007, when my beliefs started to change, I had a nervous breakdown because I felt that I might never see my brother again. And I still feel that way because I don't know really what I believe, But I hope to see him again. And I don't care if that sounds like I'm naive or something, It's just the way I feel. But like I said, so I didn't cry that much. I thought that he had gone on to the next level, or the next, he had gone up into the astral realm or the heavenly realm or whatever, where spirits are, a place that is outside of space and time, or however you want to say it. I felt that he was in a better place, and so on some level I was sort of happy for him. But my visceral response to him dying was fear, and it just felt like, wow, so anyone who seems healthy and like there's nothing wrong with them, they can just randomly fucking get cancer? And the funny thing is, that wasn't really quite the case because of what I had just explained. But I didn't understand the celiac thing. I knew that he had celiac disease. We all knew that. All I knew was that it made him have trouble with his digestion, and he had a couple other problems too, like he was dyslexic and stuff. And I said in a couple of videos that I've never known a dyslexic person who read as much as he did. because he really did read a lot. But so he had a couple problems, but the way I looked at him was basically, first of all, I kind of looked up to him because he was my older brother. But second of all, sorry, one sec. I just got distracted by various noises and stuff. Yeah, I looked up to him. And also, like I said, I kind of saw him as being healthy and fit. I really don't like it when the train goes by, because then I have to pause the video and I lose my fucking train of thought. No pun intended. But anyway, so I thought of him as being relatively healthy and like athletic, especially compared to me. So the fact that he would suddenly be stricken with cancer, and a very, very deadly cancer, that when he had it, the prognosis was essentially death, And I think that my mom looked at those doctors as being sort of hateful in a way. Now, I didn't have... First of all, when he was in the hospital, I was so like fucked up from seeing him in this state, that I was scared to go. But at some point, I decided, no, I have to see him. Like, that's cruel of me not to visit him in the hospital. And then when I went in, I was freaked out, because I was seeing other people with cancer who were probably dying. This was at Sloan Kettering. That's how it seemed to me. I'm not saying that. I'm just giving a description of how it made me feel. I don't really know what was going on, but I was seeing like a guy, and he was bald and stuff like that. But he was young. Like, whenever I hear that song, what's it called? A-Punk by the Vampire Weekend, and it has that line, "The young men's wing at Sloan Kettering," which what does that even mean? Why is that in the song? If I read the lyrics, I guess it might make sense. By the way, I love that song, but every time I hear that line, I think of my brother, because that's where he died. And I remember that the other guy that I saw was young, so I wonder if that's an actual thing. It seems random to me. In fact, with the political correctness and stuff, how could it even be a thing anymore? Like, they wouldn't say this is the young men's wing. They would say this is the young people's wing, Like, I don't think they would segregate by sex. I don't know. So anyway, to see him die like that, and, basically in kind of an undignified kind of way. And you might think, well, what do you mean undignified? How is it? I mean, he had cancer. He was in a hospital. How was his dignity stripped of him? Well, if you have a sick person, they start to lose certain abilities. They can't go to the bathroom and stuff like that, or they have to have help, and they just can't function in the same way. So it depends on the situation. Not everyone dies in an undignified way, but to some extent, he wouldn't have wanted to be seen the way that he was seen. So anyway, he died, and then I had this feeling of basically like it just fucked up my worldview, and I felt like, okay, so the message is you have no control over anything, and that God can choose to strike down whatever random person that he wants, whatever, because even though they're healthy and that they were a good person, and it doesn't make sense in any way. And like I said, I mean, I know that in a way that doesn't make sense, but you can also think of it because he had celiac disease, and that's what happened. And that's why I say it's not a joke, because that was the basic theory, at the time, was basically like, well, he developed cancer because he didn't not eat gluten. He was eating gluten, and it's fucked up his system. But yeah, like I was going to say, so my mom resented these doctors, but I again, like I said, wasn't around them very much. I saw a couple of them, but there was animosity, and I think it was created mainly by her, but I don't know. But the prognosis was basically like, you have to say goodbye to your son and whatever. And because it's this weirdly hopeless thing that I hope it's not the same way today. I've looked up the disease that he had, which wasn't it's not the typical lung cancer that people would get, but it's a type of lung cancer. So anyway, so I've looked up the disease in subsequent years and even recently, and I've looked up, did they make any progress on that? What's the prognosis now if you have that problem? And it seems like they haven't really. It's sort of like one of those really serious cancers that it doesn't seem like they have much in the way of treatment for. So I think a lot of people have this, what I'm basically talking about, which is where you develop a perverse relationship with fear, where you end up sort of holding on to your anxiety, almost like a friend, even though it's, what would you call it? But it's like, obviously it's not a good thing, but it's what and it's sort of, I had this sort of rationale that like, if I was afraid already, then it wouldn't be a thing where like, I was a happy guy with like a happy life and like well adjusted and stuff, and then I get sick, and God chooses to take me away from my family at the age of 40 or whatever, and I have like a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old or whatever the fuck, like if I were afraid, then that problem would be, I wouldn't know, but it would sort of be staved off. And I know that doesn't make sense, but I'm describing a type of rationale that I think happens with certain other people. That's why it's a perverse relationship with fear. Normally, fear should be a good thing, where it's like, are you going to, I see some of these Parkour videos, parkour, however you pronounce that. And as far as I'm concerned, some of these things really shouldn't, these kids shouldn't be doing these things because the risk-reward ratio is off. So I think, you see someone jumping from a building or like doing this thing of like jumping, there's like an alley or something, he's jumping like off and on, he's alternating, and he's like, but he lands safely. But if you fell from that actual height without bouncing off the walls to get to the floor or the ground, you would die, So you have to have, I think you have to have a good sense of what, the cost-benefit ratio, and I think a lot of those people don't seem to have that sense. And also when you're young like that, you're 20 or 25 or even 30, I guess, I don't know, whatever, but you can have this sense that you're invincible. And I've seen a lot of these videos, and it'll be like somebody jumping into like water that's like 50 feet down, and it's like, I don't know what you accomplished. And I've seen some of the ones where it goes wrong, and then there was one where somebody jumped like that and then he fucked up the landing, and then the next shot you see it cuts to him being wheeled into a room in a wheelchair, and I'm just like, was it worth it? Like, I don't know, like maybe that can get you women if they think, but you're in a wheelchair now, but in that case, I think he wasn't like irreversibly damaged. I think he just really fucked himself up. But even then, like if you do that, you can have a head injury of some kind from doing that, and that can fuck with you later, and that's another thing with some of these injuries, is they can mess with you later. But I just think people need to, it's not like I don't want people to do anything dangerous at all, but like when you're talking about like the risk of not executing it correctly is like being maimed or dying, I don't see how that's really worth it. But anyway, yeah, what I'm saying is like fear is healthy in a certain context, but we have like a neurotic populace right now because we're losing our families, we don't have enough money, people are struggling to survive, we don't have a common goal. People thought that Elon Musk wanted to go to Mars, and now he's switched it and said the moon. And if you think that's a joke, just look it up. He now wants to go to the moon, and it's like, well, there was a reason you didn't want to go to the moon in the first place. When I don't even know the technicalities of it, but I know that even my understanding of like space and astronomy and stuff, it makes much more sense to have some sort of a colony on Mars versus the moon. Partly because of gravity and stuff like that. But, yeah, anyway. So I think that there's a lot of people that have this sort of perverse relationship with fear. And I even had this feeling of like, well, what if I just decided not to be afraid? Because I still struggle with OCD, and I don't really talk about it very much. But it's so much better than it was because of the work that I've done to try to get better. And, you know, if you're listening and you have OCD, which I don't think anyone listening really does, but like, you can absolutely get better. That's one of those things that you can absolutely improve. And it doesn't go away, not really, because that's just like, again, when I was like, yesterday I was talking about genetics and how the reason that I look young has really very little to do with anything that I did. It's just genetics. The reason that I have this neurological problem, it has nothing, I don't really know. It might have something to do with how much Klonopin I took before that. And the fact that I drank a lot of coffee, I don't know. But even in that case, somebody else would have done the same exact thing and they would be fine for the rest of their life. So that's a function of genetics, you know. It's something that we need to have a reckoning about in this country, but in the world in general. There's this fear, you know, like Hitler, and so somehow if we accept the fact that genetics are so predictive and dictate so much of how your life is going to be, that we're somehow going to end up with another Holocaust or something. But yeah, I even had this thought the other day where I just sort of said, what if I just stopped this and like I stopped being afraid? Like, these ideas that I'm having, and I have certain little rituals that I do and things that I have to like repeat and stuff. But again, like I said, I'm making it sound a little bit worse than it is because it's so much better than it used to be, but I still suffer with it. And I thought to myself, like, what if I just let it go, you know? Like, now I'm thinking of Frozen, but partly because of a tweet that I made. That was one of the few movies where I went to it, and I think I've told this before, but like, I went to go see it with my mom because that's who I did anything with at that time. I didn't have friends back then, not around here. I had them in the city, but not around here. But so we went to see Frozen, and I didn't really realize that it was sort of a movie for girls and women, I guess. But, you know, I was watching it, and because it was a Disney movie, like, so I just thought, well, it's, you know, it's a fun, or Pixar, whatever it is. And I thought it's just going to be like a fun movie, like it, you know, it won't be only for kids or whatever. And she agreed to see it, so we went to see it. And within the first 15 minutes, we didn't get past about 15 minutes, I turned to her and I said, Mom, this movie, like, it's just so dumb. I don't know if I want to, like, I don't know if I want to sit through this whole thing. And she turned to me and she was like, I hate this movie, let's go. Like, I didn't have to, she didn't have to think twice about it, you know? So I guess she had the same kind of reaction to the movie. And I don't even remember what I objected to, except that I just thought it was silly, you know, and it didn't make sense to me or whatever. But yeah, I basically thought, like, what if I just let it go and just decide not to do these weird rituals that they don't make any logical sense, you know? And then I thought, well, if I do that, then I might, like, suddenly die. Because, like, I'll have learned to let go of the fear. You know what I mean? So, like, from a cosmic perspective, like, oh, you were sent here to learn to let go of your fear. And I suddenly had this thought of, like, but if I let go of my fear, maybe, like, I'll die the next day, and I won't be ready to die, but I'll die because I'll have learned to let go of my fear and that it's not worth it to me. And if that happens, then maybe I'll die, because it's like your lesson has, you've done what you incarnated on earth to do. Or you don't even have to think of it that way, but just that was the general gist of what I was thinking. So even today, it's something that I still suffer from. And I don't know if anyone relates to what I just said, but it's a type of personality, where you're sort of holding on to something. And I have the predilection for OCD, obviously, genetically. So, but I don't have to really do these things. And I just had this thought of I'm sort of holding on to this fear, and but if I suddenly let it go and I decide to sort of live my life without fear, maybe I'll die the next day, And the funny thing is, it's from the perspective of the universe or whatever, in a way, I don't think, what would I care if I died? Because if that were the point of my being on Earth, then yeah, I would be done, And I know that this doesn't really make sense, but there's a certain internal logic to it, And I think people listening will understand what I'm saying. I really didn't mean for this to be 1 hour, and I'm going to have to start limiting myself, because I don't want these videos to be that long. It's not that it's even necessarily bad, but it doesn't need to be an hour. So I'm going to try to do this thing where it's half an hour or less, and because basically what I'm saying is it just doesn't need to be that long. I mean, I understand that it's not like I kept repeating the same thing over and over. There was a flow to what I was saying, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be an hour long. So anyway, I'll just end this video with talking. So I think a lot of people have this problem. You would be surprised by the number of people who have this type of hang-up that I'm describing, but it's not the way it's not what I'm a little bit distracted because my neighbor just got home, and that's probably why it was quiet next door. But anyway, so that's not what I want for myself. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to have that type of mindset, you know what I mean? And there have been moments and times where I did let go of fear, and it's not like I'm afraid all the time. That wouldn't even make sense. But to have this sort of neurosis that I'm talking about, it hasn't really left me, and I don't want to be that way. But I'm inspired by Terence McKenna. I've read one of Terence McKenna's books, and he has this famous quote. It's probably his most famous quote, which is basically, nature loves courage. And I don't remember the rest of the quote, but it's a whole quote, And I think he was speaking off the top of his head because he was a genius. I don't think he had written this down, but he was very good at talking and giving talks and sounding very eloquent, completely extemporaneously. But he basically said, some things in life are hard, or they're scary, but if you want to do it, you have to do it. And then once you do it, you discover that you fell into a feather bed or something to that effect, and that it was basically, on some level, much easier than you were fearing it would be. Again, look up the quote, because, you know what? I'll read it right now. Okay, do I really need to read this? But I'm telling people to look something up, and I don't want to do this thing of well, you have homework to do, But anyway, and by the way, I don't even know who would give a fuck. I don't know if anyone would look it up if I said to look it up, but I'm going to read it. So it says, nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed. I think he came up with that off the top of his head. I mean, that's kind of remarkable to me, because that's something that you would think somebody would have written. But it really doesn't matter. He might have written it too. He might have written it instead and then said it. Either way, it's very eloquent. And that's the way I want to live my life, even though I do have these fears and stuff that don't even make sense. And you could say, well, everybody has fears that don't make sense. Well, not really. A fear that makes sense is one where you're afraid of some kind of harm. And, you don't, like with the parkour thing, like you're not going to jump off a building because you're going to either get severely injured or die. So if you have a fear of heights, no, that fear, that's a fear rooted in logic. But there's other fears where you're just stopping yourself from having a life, basically. But yeah, I don't know exactly what the point is of this, but I wanted to say that. I wanted to talk about how people have a perverse relationship with fear, and basically how they should try to let it go, because it doesn't serve you, and how I'm trying to let it go as well. So yeah, this video has been long enough, and that's about all. Thanks for listening.